They called it weakness. They called it madness. A queen surrendering her heart to a man who could destroy everything she had built. But as I stood in the shadows of the palace, watching conspirators plot my downfall, I realized the truth. My forbidden love had not made me vulnerable. It had forged me into something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. This is the story of how I turned passion into power, and how the very thing they meant to use against me became the weapon that saved my throne. I am Cleopatra, seventh of my name, Pharaoh of Egypt, daughter of the Nile, living goddess of Isis. But before you imagine the woman history will remember, let me tell you who I truly am in this moment, in the 28th year of my life, in the 3rd year of my reign. I am a woman who speaks 9 languages, because power lies not in the sword alone, but in understanding the hearts and minds of those who wield them. I am a scholar who has read every scroll in the great library, searching for the wisdom of those who ruled before me. I am a strategist who has learned that sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when to appear weak. And yes, I am a woman with a heart that beats, that yearns, that loves with an intensity that terrifies even me. The year is 47 before the Common Era, and Alexandria, my beloved city, stands as the jewel of the Mediterranean, where the lighthouse of Pharos guides ships from every corner of the known world to our harbors. But beauty masks danger. My throne, inherited from my father Ptolemy XII, has never been secure. My younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, just 15 years old, yet filled with ambitions planted by his advisors, believes he should rule alone. Our forced marriage, a tradition of our Macedonian Greek dynasty to keep the bloodline pure, is nothing but a political fiction. He despises me. And his regent, the eunuch Pothinus, whispers poison into his ear every night. Egypt, once the most powerful kingdom in the world, now finds itself caught between the grinding stones of Rome's civil war. Pompey the Great and Julius Caesar, once allies, now tear the Roman Republic apart in their struggle for supremacy. And we must choose a side, knowing that the wrong choice means invasion, subjugation, the end of 3,000 years of Egyptian sovereignty. But this story is not about politics alone. This is the story of what happened when Rome's victor came to my shores. When Caesar, the man who had conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon, arrived in Alexandria pursuing his defeated enemy. When I, exiled from my own palace by my brother's treachery, made a choice that would scandalize 2 nations and change the course of history. They will say I seduced him for power. They will reduce what happened between us to the calculations of a desperate queen and the lust of a conquering general. But they were not there in the moments that mattered. They did not see what I saw in his eyes when he first looked upon me, not as a queen, but as a woman. They did not feel what I felt when I realized that this man, this Roman who held the fate of Egypt in his hands, might be the only person in the world who truly understood the terrible weight of absolute power. This is the story of how that love, that forbidden, dangerous, impossible love, became the very thing my enemies sought to use against me. How Pothinus and my brother's supporters believed they could destroy me by exposing my heart. How conspiracies formed in the shadows. How assassination attempts were planned. How I was forced to choose between the throne and the man who had awakened something in me I thought I had buried forever. But this is also the story of how I learned that love, true love, is not weakness. How I discovered that the passion burning between Caesar and me could be wielded like a blade. How I transformed what they meant as my destruction into my salvation. How I proved that a woman who loves with her whole heart can be more dangerous than any army.
In this tale, you will meet Charmian, my handmaiden and closest friend since childhood, whose loyalty has never wavered even when my choices seem to lead us toward ruin. You will encounter Apollodorus, the Sicilian merchant who became my most trusted agent, a man whose courage and quick wit saved my life more times than I can count. You will see my brother Ptolemy, poisoned by ambition yet still sometimes showing glimpses of the boy I once knew. You will witness Pothinus, the eunuch whose cold intelligence and ruthless determination made him the most dangerous man in Egypt. And you will come to know Arsinoe, my younger sister, beautiful and ambitious, who saw in my distraction an opportunity to seize power for herself. And Caesar. Julius Caesar. How do I describe a man who was already a legend while still living? 52 years old when he came to Alexandria. Silver threading through his dark hair, his frame still powerful despite the years of campaigning. A man whose genius in battle was matched only by his political cunning. A man who had clemency for his enemies, yet could be utterly ruthless when necessary. A man who I would discover carried his own wounds, his own loneliness, his own hunger for something beyond conquest and glory. What I will not tell you yet is how we resolved the great crisis that threatened to destroy everything, how I navigated between my heart and my duty, how I found a way to turn my greatest vulnerability into my most powerful weapon. That revelation, that truth, you must earn by walking this path with me, through every moment of joy and terror, through every decision that kept me awake until dawn, through every risk I took with my crown and my life. The question that haunted me through every day of this ordeal was this: could a queen who loved be strong? Could a woman who gave her heart away still rule an empire? Could passion and power coexist, or would I be forced to choose between them? The answer I found changed me forever. It changed Egypt, and whether history judges me kindly or harshly for what I did, I know this: I regret nothing. Come with me now to Alexandria, to the palace where Greek marble meets Egyptian gold, where the Mediterranean breeze carries the scent of papyrus and incense. Come to the moment when everything changed, when I made the choice that would define my reign and my legend. This is my story, the story they will not tell, the truth behind the myth. Let me show you how a forbidden love became my greatest weapon.
The night I returned to Alexandria, I came not as a queen, but as cargo. Let me take you back 3 months before that moment, so you understand how far I had fallen. It was the height of summer, and the palace of Alexandria shimmered in the brutal heat that rose from the limestone courtyards. I can still see it perfectly. The great hall where I held court, its columns painted in the deep blue of lapis lazuli, hieroglyphs in gold leaf running up their length telling the stories of the gods. The floor was a mosaic depicting the Nile in flood, thousands of tiny tiles creating the illusion of flowing water beneath our feet. Incense burners shaped like lotus flowers filled the air with frankincense and myrrh, and through the tall windows draped with linen curtains you could see the harbor, where hundreds of ships bobbed at anchor, their sails furled, waiting. I sat on my throne that morning, dressed in the traditional sheath dress of white linen so fine you could see the shadow of my skin beneath it. Over my shoulders I wore a collar of gold and carnelian in the pattern of a vulture, its wings spread across my chest, the symbol of Nekhbet, the protector goddess of Upper Egypt. On my head rested the double crown, the Shent, uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. It was heavy, always heavy, but I had trained myself never to let its weight show on my face. Beside me sat my brother-husband, Ptolemy XIII. Let me describe him as he was then, before everything that would follow. He was 15 years old, still caught between boyhood and manhood. His face had the soft roundness of youth, but his jaw was beginning to set in the strong line of our Macedonian ancestors. His eyes were dark, almost black, and they held a mixture of arrogance and uncertainty that made him dangerous in unpredictable ways. He wore the Nemes headdress, the striped blue and gold cloth that framed his face, and the false beard of kingship attached to his chin with golden wires. His body was thin, not yet filled out with the muscle of manhood, and his hands, adorned with rings on every finger, fidgeted constantly with the crook and flail, the symbols of pharaonic power. But Ptolemy was not the one I watched that morning. My attention was fixed on the man who stood behind his throne, leaning down to whisper in my brother's ear. Pothinus, the eunuch who had been appointed Ptolemy's regent when our father died. Pothinus was perhaps 50 years old, though with eunuchs it is always difficult to tell. The lack of certain humors keeps them smooth-faced longer than other men. He was tall, unusually so, with a body that had run to softness around the middle, but retained a certain grace in movement. His head was completely bald, shaved smooth and oiled until it gleamed in the lamplight. His face was long and narrow, with a hooked nose that gave him the appearance of a hunting bird, and his eyes were the palest brown I had ever seen, almost amber, holding an intelligence that was utterly cold, completely devoid of mercy or compassion. He dressed in the Greek fashion rather than Egyptian, wearing a chiton of expensive purple dyed linen with a himation draped over one shoulder, fastened with a golden brooch shaped like a scarab. Around his neck hung a chain of office, thick links of gold declaring his position as regent and first minister. When Pothinus looked at me, I felt it like a physical touch, like fingers of ice trailing down my spine. He smiled often, but his smiles never reached those amber eyes. He spoke to me with perfect courtesy, addressing me as great royal wife and living Horus, but every word was edged with contempt he barely bothered to hide. That morning, he was proposing that I be removed from all administrative duties. "The matter of the grain distribution to the people," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, speaking in Greek with the refined accent of an Alexandrian aristocrat, "is far too complex for your Majesty to burden herself with. The great King Ptolemy has graciously agreed to take on this responsibility himself." I felt anger rise in my chest, hot and bright, but I forced my face to remain serene, my voice steady when I spoke. "The grain distribution has been managed by the senior co-regent since the time of our father. The people expect to see the face of their pharaoh when the granaries are opened. My face, not that of a child barely old enough to grow a beard." I saw Ptolemy's face flush with anger at my words, but before he could speak, Pothinus placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. "Your Majesty speaks with such passion," Pothinus said, and I heard the mockery beneath the courtesy. "But passion is not what Egypt needs in these troubled times. Egypt needs stability. Egypt needs tradition, and tradition says that the male heir takes precedence. You are queen by virtue of your marriage to the great king. Without him, you are nothing." Around us the court held its collective breath. Courtiers in their finest linens and jewels stood frozen, their painted eyes wide, unsure where to look. I saw fear on many faces. They knew what was coming, had seen the signs for weeks. Pothinus was making his move. I stood slowly, letting the moment stretch, letting them see that I would not be cowed. "I am queen by right of blood, by my father's decree, and by the will of the gods. I was ruling Egypt while my brother was still learning his letters, and I will continue to rule, with or without the approval of advisors who forget their place." The threat in my words was clear. Pothinus's pale eyes narrowed, and for just a moment I saw the hatred there,
undisguised. "We shall see, Your Majesty," he said softly. "We shall see what Egypt decides."
That night, Charmian came to my private chambers as the sun set over the harbor, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Charmian had been with me since we were both 7 years old. Her mother had been my nurse, and when fever took her mother's life, I had begged my father to let Charmian stay with me. Now, at 28, she was more than a handmaiden. She was my confidant, my friend, the sister I could trust when my own blood siblings plotted against me. She was beautiful, Charmian, though she never seemed to realize it. Her skin was the color of honey, darker than mine, showing the Egyptian blood that ran in her veins, mixed with Greek. Her eyes were large and doe-like, framed by thick lashes, and her hair fell in black waves to her waist, though she usually kept it braided and wrapped around her head in the Greek style. She was small, barely reaching my shoulder, with a delicate frame that made people underestimate her strength. That night, she wore a simple dress of blue linen, cinched at the waist with a woven belt, and her only jewelry was a small golden ankh on a chain around her neck, a gift I had given her years before. "They are planning something," she said without preamble, closing the door behind her and checking to ensure no one lingered in the corridor outside. "I heard 2 of Pothinus's men talking in the servants' quarters. They mentioned your name and spoke of removing the obstacle." I sat before my bronze mirror, letting her help me remove the heavy wig I had worn all day, revealing my own hair beneath, dark and cut short for comfort beneath the elaborate headdresses of state. My chambers were my sanctuary, decorated in a mixture of Greek and Egyptian styles that reflected my own nature. The walls were painted with scenes from the Book of the Dead, but Greek statues of marble stood in niches. Egyptian alabaster lamps provided light, but the furniture was Greek, couches and chairs, instead of the low stools of ancient tradition. I said, quietly, meeting her eyes in the mirror's reflection, "I know. Pothinus has been turning the army against me. The commanders who were loyal to my father he has replaced with men who owe their positions to him. The treasury officials, the same. Even the palace guards, I no longer know who can be trusted." "Then you must act first," Charmian said urgently, her hand stilling in my hair. "You must remove him before he removes you." "With what power?" I asked, and I heard the bitterness in my own voice. "Every move I make, he counters. Every command I give, he undermines. And Ptolemy believes everything that eunuch whispers in his ear." I stood and walked to the window, looking out over Alexandria, my city, glowing with lamplight as night fell. I could see the Pharos lighthouse, one of the wonders of the world, its beacon fire visible for miles out to sea. I could see the roofs of the museum and the library, where the accumulated knowledge of humanity resided. I could see the harbor, the Heptastadion causeway connecting the mainland to the island of Pharos. This was my birthright, my responsibility, and it was slipping through my fingers. "There is someone I want you to meet," Charmian said carefully. "Someone who might be able to help." 2 days later, I met Apollodorus. He came to the palace disguised as a wine merchant, carrying amphoras from Sicily, his supposed homeland. Charmian brought him to my chambers through the servants' passages, and when he stood before me, I understood immediately why she trusted him. Apollodorus was perhaps 35 years old, a man who had lived a life of action written clearly on his body. He was of medium height but powerfully built, his shoulders broad beneath his simple merchant's tunic of undyed wool. His skin was dark from the sun, the deep bronze of a man who spends his life on the sea, and his face was all hard angles, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, a nose that had been broken at least once, and eyes that were a startling blue-green like the Mediterranean on a clear day. His hair was dark brown, shot through with gray, and he wore it longer than was fashionable, tied back with a leather cord. A scar ran from his right eyebrow down to his cheekbone, and his hands were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who could handle a sword as easily as a ship's rigging. But it was his eyes that convinced me. They were intelligent, assessing, missing nothing, but they held something else too: integrity. In a palace full of schemers and liars, this merchant from Sicily looked at me with honest appraisal. "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting orders over storms at sea. He bowed, not with the elaborate court genuflection, but with the simple respect of a free man to someone he chose to honor. "Charmian tells me you need someone who can move unseen through Alexandria, someone who knows the city's underbelly as well as its palaces." "And you are such a man?" I asked, studying him. "I am a man who trades in information as well as wine," he said bluntly. "I know which officials take bribes, which merchants deal with pirates, which priests preached against your rule in the temples. I know because I make it my business to know everything that might affect my trade. And I know that if Pothinus deposes you, Egypt will descend into chaos that will be bad for everyone's business." I appreciated his honesty. "And what do you want in return for your help?" "Exclusive rights to import Sicilian wine to Alexandria," he said with a slight smile, "and perhaps the knowledge that I helped preserve Egypt's independence when Rome comes sniffing around our borders." "Rome is already here," I said grimly. "Pompey and Caesar are tearing the Republic apart, and Egypt will be caught in the middle." "Then you need allies," Apollodorus said, "and you need to know what Pothinus is planning." What Apollodorus discovered over the next 2 weeks was worse than I had feared. Pothinus had been in secret communication with Pompey, offering him Egypt's support in exchange for Rome recognizing Ptolemy XIII as sole ruler. The army commanders had been promised land and titles, the treasury officials the same. Even some of the priesthood had been bought with promises of increased temple revenues. And then came the news that changed everything. It was late summer when the messenger arrived from the eastern desert, dusty and exhausted from hard riding. Pompey the Great had been defeated at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece. Caesar was victorious, and Pompey was fleeing towards Egypt, seeking refuge, bringing with him what remained of his fleet and his army. I was in the throne room when Pothinus received the news, and I watched his face carefully. I saw no surprise there, only calculation. Within hours, Ptolemy had called a council meeting. I was not invited. Charmian came to me that night with the details, whispered to her by a slave who cleaned the council chamber. "They are planning to murder Pompey when he arrives. Ptolemy will send ships to meet him, welcome him as a friend, and then kill him. They will send his head to Caesar as a gift to win his favor." I felt my blood run cold. The murder of a Roman consul, a man who has been named friend and ally of Egypt by the Senate, will bring Caesar's wrath down upon us. They are fools if they think otherwise. Pothinus believes Caesar will be grateful. He believes this will secure Egypt's future. But I knew better. I had read Caesar's commentaries on his campaigns in Gaul. I had studied every scrap of information about this man who now held Rome in his grip. Caesar was not a man who appreciated others doing his work for him, and he was certainly not a man who would condone the murder of a Roman consul, even an enemy, by foreign kings. I had to act. But how? I was already under virtual house arrest. Guards watched my movements. My own brother would not even meet with me. And within days, Pompey would arrive, and Egypt would commit an act that could destroy us all. Then Apollodorus came to me with a desperate plan. "Caesar is pursuing Pompey," he said, spreading a map on the table in my chambers. "His fleet is perhaps a week behind. When he arrives in Alexandria and finds Pompey dead, murdered by Egyptian hands, he will need to decide what to do with Egypt. If you can get to him first, if you can present yourself as the legitimate ruler, someone who opposed this murder, you might be able to salvage the situation." "How do I get to him when I cannot even leave the palace?" I asked. Apollodorus smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed impossible challenges. "Leave that to me, Your Majesty." The night Pompey arrived in Alexandria's harbor, I was locked in my chambers.
Through my window, I could see the Roman galleys approaching, their sails furled, their oars dipping in rhythm. I could see the small boat that went out from the royal harbor to meet them, carrying my brother's men, and I could imagine what would happen next, though I could not see it from my window. The next morning, all of Alexandria knew. Pompey the Great, consul of Rome, victor of 100 battles, had been stabbed to death as he stepped from his ship. His head had been cut from his body and preserved in brine. His signet ring had been taken as proof, and his wife and son, who had watched from their galley, had fled in horror, sailing away from Egypt as fast as the winds could carry them. Ptolemy and Pothinus were celebrating in the throne room. I could hear the sound of music and laughter drifting through the palace. They believed they had secured Egypt's future. They had no idea they had sealed its doom. 3 days later, Caesar arrived. I watched from my window as his fleet entered the harbor, the Roman standards.
Apollodorus gestured to a large carpet rolled up and leaning against the wall, the kind merchants used to transport expensive textiles. "You will have to trust me, Your Majesty, and you will have to be willing to endure a very uncomfortable journey." I understood immediately what he was proposing. It was undignified. It was dangerous. If we were caught, Pothinus would have the excuse he needed to eliminate me entirely. But I looked at Charmian, who nodded encouragement, and I looked at Apollodorus, whose sea-green eyes held steady on mine, and I made my choice. "Let us go to meet the master of Rome," I said. An hour later, I was curled inside that carpet, barely able to breathe, every muscle cramped and aching, as Apollodorus hoisted me onto his shoulder and carried me through the palace corridors. I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, could see nothing but darkness, could smell nothing but the wool of the carpet and my own fear. I heard voices, guards challenging Apollodorus. I heard his easy laugh, his casual explanation that he was bringing a gift for the Roman general, a fine carpet from Persia. I heard the clink of coins, a bribe being paid, then the sound of footsteps again, the creak of a door, and finally Apollodorus's voice, speaking in Latin, a gift for Caesar. The carpet was lowered to the floor. I heard another voice, a man's voice, speaking in Latin with the accent of Rome. "What gift comes rolled in a carpet?" "The best kind," Apollodorus said, and I felt him begin to unroll the carpet. I spilled out onto a tiled floor, gasping for air, my hair disheveled, my simple linen dress twisted around my legs. For a moment, I could only lay there, catching my breath, trying to orient myself. Then I looked up and saw him for the first time. Julius Caesar stood above me, silhouetted against lamplight, and even in that moment of complete vulnerability, I was taking in every detail of the man who held my fate in his hands. He was 52 years old enough to be my father, but he stood straight and tall, his body still hard with the muscle of a lifetime of campaigning. He was of medium height, neither tall nor short, but he carried himself with such authority that he seemed larger than he was. His face was lean and sharp-featured, with high cheekbones and a prominent Roman nose. His eyes were gray, the gray of storm clouds, and they were studying me with an intensity that made me feel stripped bare of every pretense. His hair was dark, but heavily threaded with silver, receding from his forehead in a way he clearly despised, judging by how he wore a laurel wreath to disguise it. He was clean-shaven in the Roman fashion, and his jaw was strong, his mouth firm, but capable, I would learn, of a smile that could light up his entire face. He wore a simple tunic of purple-bordered white linen, the toga laid aside for the evening, and around his neck I glimpsed a small golden amulet, a legionary's good luck charm.
For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. I saw surprise in his eyes, then curiosity, then something else, something that made my breath catch in my throat. Then he smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Well," he said in perfect Greek, his voice cultured and warm with amusement, "I have received many gifts in my time, but never one quite so remarkable. I am Julius Caesar, and you, I presume, are Cleopatra." I climbed to my feet, ignoring the pain in my cramped muscles, and drew myself up to my full height. I had shed my royal regalia, but I would not shed my dignity. "I am Cleopatra, daughter of Ptolemy Auletes, rightful pharaoh of Egypt, and I have come to present my case before you." He gestured to a couch. "Then present it, by all means. Though perhaps we might begin with wine. You look as though you could use it." And that was how it began. My great challenge, my impossible situation. I was alone with Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, and I had one night to convince him that I should rule Egypt. One night to outmaneuver Pothinus and my brother. One night to save my throne and my life. But I looked after him as I sat across from him and accepted the cup of wine he poured with his own hands, as I began to tell him my story and saw the way he listened, really listened, his storm-gray eyes never leaving my face. I realized something that sent a thrill of fear and excitement through me. This was not just about politics. Something was happening between us, something that I had not anticipated, something that could change everything, or destroy everything. The minor challenge I faced that night was clear: convince Caesar to support my claim to the throne. But the major challenge, the one that would haunt me for months to come, was just beginning to reveal itself. How do you rule a kingdom when your heart no longer belongs only to yourself?
We talked until dawn. I had expected many things from Julius Caesar. I had expected arrogance, the supreme confidence of a man who had conquered Gaul and defeated Pompey. I had expected the calculating gaze of a politician weighing how best to use Egypt to his advantage. I had expected the dismissive attitude so many men showed toward women who dared to speak of power and statecraft. What I had not expected was to be truly heard. Caesar listened to my story with complete attention, his gray eyes never wavering from my face. I told him about my father's death, about the will that named both Ptolemy and me as co-rulers, about Pothinus's machinations, about being driven from the palace. I told him about Egypt's precarious position between Rome's grinding political factions, about our economy, our grain production, our trade routes. I spoke of the people of Alexandria, Greek and Egyptian, living side by side, of the great library and museum, of the ancient traditions that stretched back 3,000 years. And he asked questions, not the superficial questions of a man pretending interest, but deep, probing questions that revealed a mind that grasped complexities instantly. He asked about the dynamics between the Greek ruling class and the native Egyptian population. He asked about the power of the priesthood, about the strength of our navy, about the loyalty of our garrisons in Upper Egypt. He asked about the structure of our government, the sources of royal revenue, the relationships with neighboring kingdoms. The room where we sat was one of the smaller reception chambers in the royal quarter that Caesar had commandeered. The walls were painted with frescoes depicting the gardens of the gods, trees heavy with fruit that never fell, rivers that never ran dry. The floor was tiled in a geometric pattern of black and white marble. Through the windows I could hear the sounds of the harbor, ships creaking at anchor, sailors calling to each other in a dozen languages.
Oil lamps cast flickering shadows, and the scent of the wine, a fine vintage from Chios, mixed with the smell of the sea. Caesar himself was a study in contrasts. He sat with the casual ease of a soldier accustomed to campaign camps, but his mind worked with the precision of a scholar. He made jokes, his wit sharp and unexpected, yet beneath the humor I sensed a deep loneliness, an isolation that came from being the most powerful man in Rome with no one who could truly understand the weight he carried. "Your brother," he said, at one point, swirling the wine in his cup, "is 15 years old and surrounded by ambitious men who use him as a puppet. Yet you speak of him with anger, but also with something else. Affection? Regret?" I was surprised by his perception. "He is still my brother," I said quietly. "I remember when he was born. I was 13. I held him when he was just days old. He was beautiful, perfect. I never imagined then that we would become enemies." "Power does that," Caesar said, and there was something in his voice, some old pain. "It turns brothers into enemies, friends into traitors. I crossed the Rubicon and marched on Rome, and men I had known for 30 years suddenly wanted me dead. Pompey, who was once my ally, my friend, my son-in-law, died on an Egyptian beach, murdered for no better reason than your brother thought it would please me." His face hardened. "It did not please me." "I argued against that murder," I said urgently. "I was not part of that council. I would never have sanctioned such dishonor." "I know," he said, surprising me again. "I have my sources in this palace. I know that you were locked in your chambers when that decision was made. I know that Pothinus orchestrated it, believing he could buy my favor with Roman blood. He understands nothing of honor, that eunuch." The contempt in his voice when he spoke of Pothinus gave me hope. "Then you will support my claim to rule?" I asked, leaning forward. "You will see that I am the rightful pharaoh." Caesar set down his cup and looked at me with those storm-gray eyes, and I felt pinned by that gaze, unable to look away. "I will support the ruler who can best serve Rome's interests," he said bluntly. "Egypt is wealthy. Egypt controls the grain that feeds half the Mediterranean. Egypt stands at the crossroads of 3 continents. Whoever rules Egypt holds tremendous power. I need to know that power will be wielded by someone I can trust. Someone who understands that Egypt's future is tied to Rome's." "Egypt will never be Rome's province," I said, and my voice was steel, despite the fear fluttering in my chest. "For now," Caesar said, and there was no threat in his tone, only statement of fact. "But the world is changing, Cleopatra. The age of independent kingdoms is ending. Rome is the future, whether you like it or not. The question is whether Egypt will be Rome's partner or Rome's conquest." "And if I agree to be Rome's partner? If I acknowledge Rome's interest in Egyptian affairs, will you support my sole rule?" "Your sole rule?" Caesar raised an eyebrow. "Your father's will names you and Ptolemy as co-rulers." "My father's will was written when I was 17 and Ptolemy was 9. The circumstances have changed. Ptolemy is under Pothinus's control. He will never be more than a puppet. Egypt needs a strong ruler, not a child manipulated by ambitious advisors." Caesar stood and walked to the window, looking out over Alexandria. The first light of dawn was beginning to touch the eastern sky, turning it from black to deep blue. "You are 28 years old," he said, not looking at me. "You have never commanded an army. You have no military experience. And yet you ask me to place the fate of Egypt in your hands alone." I rose and went to stand beside him,
close enough that I could smell the scent of him, leather and wine, and something else, something masculine and compelling. I am 28 years old, I said, and I speak 9 languages. I have read every military treatise in the library. I understand logistics, supply lines, the importance of morale. I may have never commanded an army, but I understand how armies work. And more importantly, I understand Egypt. I understand its people, its culture, its needs. Ptolemy understands nothing but his own petulant desires. Caesar turned to look at me, and we were standing so close I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar on his chin, the gray in his hair that caught the lamplight. "You are bold," he said softly, "dangerously bold. Do you know what happened to the last queen who defied me? Vercingetorix's wife. She watched her husband paraded in chains through Rome." "Vercingetorix was a rebel who fought Rome with weapons," I said, holding his gaze. "I seek to fight with something far more powerful: knowledge, alliance, mutual benefit. I offer you Egypt's wealth, Egypt's grain, Egypt's strategic position. In return, I ask only for recognition of my legitimate rule and protection from those who would see me dead." "Only that?" he said, and there was amusement in his voice now, and something else, something that made my heart race. "Only that," I whispered. For a long moment we stood there, close enough to touch, the air between us crackling with something I had never felt before. Then Caesar stepped back, and the spell was broken. "I will think on what you have said," he told me, "but you cannot stay here. If Pothinus learns you are in the palace, he will move against you immediately. You need to return to wherever you have been hiding." "The house of Apollodorus in the Greek quarter," I said. "Then go there and wait. I will summon both you and your brother to appear before me formally. I will hear both your cases publicly, and then I will render my judgment." It was more than I had hoped for. A public hearing meant Caesar was taking me seriously, was willing to consider my claim. But as Apollodorus arrived to smuggle me back out of the palace, as I prepared to climb back into that suffocating carpet, Caesar caught my hand. His fingers were warm, calloused from holding swords and reins, and when he touched me, I felt a jolt like lightning running up my arm. "Cleopatra," he said quietly, and it was the first time he had used my name without my title. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A desperate girl playing at queen," he said. "But you are no girl. You are a woman."
My father's will named my brother and me as equals, not king and subordinate wife, but co-rulers. I have ruled Egypt since I was 18 years old. I have managed the grain distribution that keeps our people fed. I have negotiated treaties with Syria and Judea. I have maintained the fleet that protects our trade. My brother, with respect, has done nothing but sit on a throne and sign documents placed before him by Pothinus. I turned to face Ptolemy directly. "Tell me, brother, how many nomes are there in Egypt? What is the current price of wheat in the market? When do the Nile floods usually begin? Who is the high priest of Ptah in Memphis?" Ptolemy's face flushed red, and he looked to Pothinus for help. The eunuch's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Ptolemy could not answer a single question. I turned back to Caesar. "This is who Pothinus would have rule Egypt, a boy who knows nothing of the kingdom he claims to govern? I ask you, Caesar, who would Rome rather deal with? A competent ruler who understands statecraft, or a puppet controlled by an ambitious eunuch who murdered a Roman consul to curry your favor?" The throne room erupted. Pothinus shouted that I was a liar, that he had acted to protect Egypt's interests. Ptolemy was screaming that I had no right to question him. Caesar's soldiers raised their spears, calling for order.
Caesar stood, and the room fell silent. The force of his personality was such that even in an Egyptian throne room surrounded by Egyptian power, he commanded absolute attention. "I have heard enough," he said. The will of Ptolemy Auletes was clear. His children were to rule as co-equals. That will was guaranteed by Rome. Therefore, I decree that Ptolemy and Cleopatra will both rule with equal authority as their father intended. My heart sank. This was not what I needed. Equal authority with Ptolemy meant equal authority with Pothinus, which meant no authority at all. But Caesar was not finished. However, he continued, it is clear that the current arrangement is not working. Therefore, I will remain in Alexandria to ensure that both rulers govern fairly and justly. Any major decision of state must be brought before me for approval. Any dispute between the co-rulers will be settled by me. In effect, Egypt will be under Roman protection until such time as the royal siblings can demonstrate they can rule together in harmony. It was brilliant and terrible. Caesar had just declared Egypt a virtual protectorate of Rome while maintaining the fiction of our independence. Pothinus's face had gone white with fury, but I understood what Caesar had done. He had given himself the authority to check Pothinus at every turn, to prevent him from moving against me. He had bought me time. And more than that, he had guaranteed he would remain in Alexandria, remain close to me. That night, there was a feast to celebrate Caesar's judgment. The throne room was transformed. Couches brought in for dining in the Roman style, tables laden with delicacies from across the Mediterranean, roasted peacock and honeyed dormice for the Romans, spiced lamb and dates for the Greeks, fish from the Nile and bread sweetened with carob for the Egyptians. Wine flowed, musicians played, dancers performed. I reclined on a couch near Caesar, close enough to speak quietly beneath the noise of the celebration. Ptolemy and Pothinus were on the far side of the room, the eunuch's amber eyes watching us with unveiled suspicion. "You have made an enemy today," I said to Caesar, keeping my voice low. "Pothinus will not forgive this." "Pothinus was already my enemy," Caesar replied, selecting a fig from a silver platter. "Men like him only understand power. Show weakness, and they will destroy you. Show strength, and they will at least respect you enough to plot carefully." "And my brother?" Caesar glanced across the room at Ptolemy, who was drinking heavily, laughing too loudly at something one of his commanders was saying. "Your brother is not your enemy. He is a child playing at being king. Remove Pothinus's influence, and he might become someone you could work with." "Remove Pothinus's influence," I repeated. "How do you propose to do that?" Caesar's gray eyes met mine, and I saw the ruthlessness there, the steel beneath the cultured exterior. "Carefully," he said. "Very carefully, but it will be done." A dancer whirled past our couches, her movements sinuous, her costume of transparent silk leaving little to the imagination. Caesar barely glanced of her. His attention was on me. "You played your part well today," he said, asking Ptolemy those questions. "You made him look like a fool without ever calling him one." "It was not playing," I said. "It was simply truth. He is not fit to rule." "And you are?" asked Caesar. "You have never commanded an army in battle. You have never faced an enemy who wants you dead. You have never had to make the choices that keep you awake at night, the choices between bad options and worse ones." "No," I admitted, "but I'm willing to learn." "Are you willing to teach me?" Something flickered in Caesar's eyes, something that made my breath catch. "That depends," he said slowly. "What exactly do you want to learn?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. We were talking more than politics now, more than statecraft. We both knew it. "Everything," I said quietly. "I want to learn everything." He set down his wine cup and stood. "Walk with me," he said. There is something I wish to show you." I rose, aware of Charmian's worried glance, aware of Pothinus's suspicious stare, aware of the whispers that would follow, but I did not care. I followed Caesar out of the throne room, through corridors lit by oil lamps, until we emerged onto a balcony overlooking the harbor. The night was warm, the air filled with the scent of the sea and the distant sounds of the city. The Pharos lighthouse blazed in the darkness, its fire visible for miles. Ships rocked at anchor, their rigging creaking. And somewhere in the streets below, someone was singing in Egyptian, a melancholy song about lovers separated by the Nile. "Do you see that?" Caesar asked, pointing to his galleys anchored in the royal harbor. 3,600 men. Not enough to conquer Egypt, barely enough to hold Alexandria if the whole city turned against me. I came here chasing Pompeii, expecting to spend a few days and leave. Now I am trapped in a situation that could easily become a disaster. "Then leave," I said. "No one is holding you here." "No." He turned to look at me, and his face was in shadow, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze. "I think someone is holding me here. Something I did not expect. Something dangerous." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he must hear it. "What is that?" He reached out and touched my face, his fingers trailing along my cheek, rough and gentle at the same time. "You know what," he said softly. "You have known it since the moment you spilled out of that carpet at my feet. This is not just politics between us, Cleopatra. This is something far more complicated." I should have stepped back. I should have maintained the dignity of a queen, the distance necessary for a political alliance. But I did not. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes for just a moment, feeling the warmth of his hand against my skin. "Yes," I whispered. "I know." When I opened my eyes, he was closer, so close I could feel his breath on my face. "This is a mistake," he said, but he was not moving away. "I am old enough to be your father. I am married. I am your kingdom's protector, which means I hold all the power between us. This could destroy you. Or it could save me," I said, and I reached up to touch his face in return, feeling the roughness of his jaw, the strength of his bone structure. "This is my choice. I choose this, whatever this is. I choose you." He kissed me then, and it was not gentle, it was fierce and desperate and hungry, the kiss of two people who had held back too long, who knew they were making a choice that could change everything. I kissed him back with equal ferocity, my hands tangling in his hair, knocking the laurel wreath to the ground forgotten. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caesar rested his forehead against mine. "We cannot do this," he said, but his arms were still around me, holding me close. "We cannot not do this. It is already done." "Cleopatra," he said, and there was something almost like pain in his voice. "If we do this, if we let this happen, it will complicate everything. Pothinus will use it against you. He will say you are my whore, that you are betraying Egypt for Roman favor. Your people will turn against you." "Let them," I said fiercely. "I have been judged my entire life. Judged for being a woman who dares to rule. Judged for being too ambitious, too educated, too outspoken. I am tired of living for other people's approval. For once, I want to live for myself. For this." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his gray eyes searching my face. "You understand."
The next 3 months were perhaps the most dangerous and intoxicating of my life. By day, I was Pharaoh of Egypt, attending to the business of state, managing disputes, overseeing the grain distribution, meeting with priests and officials. By night, I was a woman in love, stealing through secret passages to Caesar's quarters, lying in his arms while we talked of everything and nothing, politics and philosophy and poetry, until the first light of dawn forced us apart.
We were careful. So careful. Charmian and Apollodorus helped us maintain the fiction, arranging meetings that could pass as diplomatic conferences, ensuring that servants could be trusted or avoided. Caesar's own men, his secretary, Gaius Oppius, and his engineer, Rufio, kept watch and turned blind eyes when necessary. But Pothinus was no fool. He was watching, always watching, those amber eyes missing nothing. It was 6 weeks after the balcony kiss when he made his first move. I was in my private chambers, working through reports from Upper Egypt, when Charmian burst in, her face pale with fear. "They are saying terrible things in the agora," she said, closing the door behind her. "Someone, I do not know who, has been spreading rumors. They say you have abandoned Egypt for Roman favor. They say you spend your nights in Caesar's bed, betraying your people for the pleasure of a foreign conqueror. They say you are no true pharaoh, no daughter of Isis, but a whore who has sold Egypt to Rome." I felt as though I had been struck. I set down my stylus carefully, fighting to keep my hands from trembling. Who is spreading these rumors? No one will say, but they whisper that Pothinus has proof, that he has servants who will testify, that he's building a case to have you declared unfit to rule. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over Alexandria. From here I could see the agora, the great marketplace where Alexandrians gathered to trade and gossip and debate. I could see the crowds moving through the streets, the mixture of Greek and Egyptian dress, the diversity that made Alexandria great. And I wondered how many of them believed the rumors, how many had turned against me. "What does Caesar say?" Charmian asked quietly. "I have not told him yet," I admitted. "He has enough to worry about. His men are growing restless. They expected to leave weeks ago, but Caesar keeps finding reasons to stay. Some of the centurions are grumbling about being trapped in Alexandria while Mark Antony manages Rome in Caesar's absence. And Pothinus has been stirring up the Alexandrian mob, playing on their resentment of the Roman presence." "Then you must tell him," Charmian insisted. "He needs to know that his staying here is destroying your reputation." But I shook my head. If I tell him, he will want to do something dramatic, something Roman. He will want to make a public declaration or execute someone, or, I realized the truth even as I spoke it, or he will leave. To protect my reputation, he will leave Egypt. "Would that be so terrible?" Charmian asked gently. "If it saved your throne?" I turned to look at her, this woman who had been with me since childhood, who knew me better than anyone. "Yes," I said simply, "it would be terrible." "Because I love him, Charmian. I did not mean to, but I do. And the thought of him leaving, of never seeing him again, of going back to being alone in this palace surrounded by enemies." I could not finish the sentence. Charmian came to embrace me, and I let myself lean on her, just for a moment. Let myself be not a queen, but simply a woman in an impossible situation. "Oh, my friend," she whispered, "what are we going to do?" What I did was something I had learned from watching Caesar. When faced with an enemy you can't fight directly, you change the battlefield. I called for Apollodorus and gave him a mission. "I need to speak to the people," I told him. "Not in the throne room, not in some formal setting where only the wealthy and powerful can attend. I need to go into the streets, into the temples, into the market. I need them to see me, to hear me, to remember that I am not just a queen, but one of them." "That is dangerous," Apollodorus said, his sea-green eyes worried.
Pothinus could easily arrange an accident in the crowded streets. Then you will ensure no accident occurs, I said. Gather men you trust. We go tomorrow. I dressed not as a queen, but as an ordinary Alexandrian woman. I wore a simple chiton of undyed linen, pinned at the shoulders with plain bronze brooches. Over my head, I draped a himation that covered my distinctive hair. No jewelry, no royal insignia, nothing to mark me as pharaoh. Only my bearing, my voice, and my words. Apollodorus and 6 of his most trusted men surrounded me as we walked through the agora. The morning sun was already hot, beating down on the paving stones, and the market was in full swing. Merchants called out their wares in a dozen languages. The smell of fresh bread, mixed with fish from the harbor, with spices from Arabia, with the sweat of thousands of bodies pressed together. Children ran through the crowds, dodging between adults, laughing and shouting. Beggars sat in the shadows, hands outstretched. Philosophers argued in the colonnades, their students gathered around them. I stopped at a bread seller's stall, an old Egyptian woman with hands gnarled from a lifetime of kneading dough. How much for a loaf? I asked her in Egyptian, the common language of the streets, not the formal language of the temples. She looked up at me, squinting in the sun, and named her price. I paid it, and broke the bread, offering half back to her. Share it with me, I said, and tell me, grandmother, how is business? She took the bread suspiciously, but hunger won over caution. As she ate, she began to talk. Business is bad, she said. The Roman soldiers eat much but pay little, and now there are rumors of war, that the young king will drive the Romans out, and when that happens, Alexandria will burn. I am too old to start over again. What do you think of your queen? I asked her carefully. Of Cleopatra? The old woman spat on the ground. Which one? We have had so many. This one, they say she lies with the Roman, betrays Egypt for her own pleasure. I do not know if it is true, but I know this. When she was in charge of the grain distribution, my grandson did not go hungry. Now, with the boy king and his eunuch advisor, the warehouses are locked tight while grain rots and children starve. So perhaps she is a whore, perhaps not, but at least she remembered that pharaohs are supposed to feed their people. I felt tears prick my eyes at her words, this simple truth from a simple woman. What if I told you, I said softly, that Cleopatra cares more about Egypt than about any man, Roman or otherwise? What if I told you that everything she does for her people? The old woman looked at me more closely, her rheumy eyes suddenly sharp. Are you? She began, but I shook my head slightly. I am no one, just a woman who wants to understand what the people think. Thank you for the bread, grandmother, and for your honesty. We moved through the agora, and I repeated this scene a dozen times, with a fisherman, with a cloth merchant, with a silversmith, with a prostitute, with a scribe. And what I learned broke my heart and gave me hope at the same time. The people did not care about my love affair with Caesar, or rather, they cared, but only insofar as it affected them. What they cared about was bread and safety, and the fear that Alexandria would be caught in a war between Ptolemy and Caesar. They wanted a ruler who would protect them, feed them, give them stability. Whether that ruler was sleeping with a Roman general was secondary to whether their children would eat tonight. But there was another current running underneath the surface, one more dangerous. The native Egyptians resented the Greeks who had ruled them for 300 years. The Greeks resented the Romans who were now occupying their city. And both groups could be turned against me if Pothinus played his cards right, if he made me the symbol of foreign domination, the queen who had betrayed Egypt to Rome. That evening, I met with Caesar in his quarters. He had commandeered a suite of rooms in the palace's east wing, furnished in the Roman style with simple elegance. The walls were painted a deep red, decorated with painted garlands. The furniture.
Caesar's jaw tightened. Anyone who says that does not know me. No one, not even you, my love, could make me forget my duty. But they do not know that, I said. All they see is Rome's greatest general lingering in Egypt, and they assume it is because of a woman, and they are not entirely wrong, are they? He did not answer, which was answer enough. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our impossible situation pressing down on us. There is something else, I said finally, something I discovered today. Pothinus is not just spreading rumors. He is actively recruiting. He has been meeting with the military commanders, promising them land and titles if they support Ptolemy. He has been stockpiling weapons in the warehouses near the harbor, and he has been in contact with Achilles. Achilles was the commander of the Egyptian army, a Greek mercenary who had served my father and now controlled 20,000 men stationed outside Alexandria. He was ambitious, brutal, and utterly without loyalty except to whoever paid him most. Caesar's expression darkened. You are certain? Apollodorus has sources everywhere. He heard it from 3 different people. Pothinus is planning something, Caesar. Something big, and soon. Then we need to move first, Caesar said, standing and beginning to pace, his mind already working through strategies. We arrest Pothinus, charge him with treason, eliminate him before he can act. On what grounds, I asked. Meeting with military commanders is not treason. Stockpiling weapons could be explained as preparation for defense. And if we move against him without solid proof, we risk turning the entire city against us. Pothinus has been very careful to maintain the appearance of legality. Legality, Caesar said bitterly. I have not worried overmuch about legality in my career. When I crossed the Rubicon, you were in Roman territory, commanding Roman legions, I interrupted. Here, you are a guest, a protector, not a conqueror. If you act too overtly, you prove everything Pothinus has been saying about you, that you are here to subjugate Egypt, to make it a Roman province. Caesar's expression darkened. You are certain. Apollodorus has sources everywhere. He heard it from 3 different people. Pothinus is planning something, Caesar. Something big, and soon. Then we need to move first, Caesar said, standing and beginning to pace, his mind already working through strategies. We arrest Pothinus, charge him with treason, eliminate him before he can act. On what grounds, I asked. Meeting with military commanders is not treason. Stockpiling weapons could be explained as preparation for defense. And if we move against him without solid proof, we risk turning the entire city against us. Pothinus has been very careful to maintain the appearance of legality. Legality, Caesar said bitterly. I have not worried overmuch about legality in my career. When I crossed the Rubicon, you were in Roman territory, commanding Roman legions, I interrupted. Here, you are a guest, a protector, not a conqueror. If you act too overtly, you prove everything Pothinus has been saying about you, that you are here to subjugate Egypt, to make it a Roman province. Caesar stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw respect in his eyes mixed with frustration. He said, You have learned well, too well, perhaps. You argue like a senator. I argue like someone who wants to keep both her throne and her head, and who wants to keep you alive as well. Because make no mistake, Caesar, if Pothinus moves against me, he will move against you too. 20,000 Egyptian soldiers against your 3,600, those are not good odds even for you. The truth of that hung in the air between us. Caesar had conquered Gaul with brilliant tactics and iron discipline, but he had also always ensured he had enough men. Here in Alexandria, he was dangerously undermanned, and if the Egyptian army marched on the city, he could be trapped.
Then what do you suggest? He asked, coming back to sit beside me. Because doing nothing is not an option. Pothinus will not wait forever. I suggest we split his coalition, I said, the plan forming as I spoke. Pothinus's power rests on 3 pillars: my brother Ptolemy, the military under Achilles, and the support of the Alexandrian mob. We need to break at least one of those pillars. Ptolemy is completely under Pothinus's control, Caesar said. The boy barely thinks for himself. Ptolemy is 15 years old and filled with the arrogance of youth. He believes himself a great king, but Pothinus treats him like a child. What if we could drive a wedge between them, make Ptolemy see that Pothinus is using him, that the eunuch will discard him the moment he is no longer useful? How? Caesar asked, his military mind already engaging with the problem. Ptolemy wants glory, I said. He wants to be seen as a warrior, a conqueror like Alexander. Pothinus has kept him safely in the palace, making all the real decisions, while Ptolemy plays at being king. What if we offered Ptolemy something Pothinus cannot give him, the chance to prove himself in command? Caesar's eyes narrowed. You want to give your brother, who wants you dead, command of an army? I want to give him the illusion of command, I corrected. A small force, sent to deal with some minor problem, enough to make him feel important, to make him resent Pothinus's control. And while he is gone from Alexandria, we work on undermining Pothinus's other sources of support. It was risky, but Caesar saw the logic in it. Over the next week, we set our plan in motion. There had been reports of bandits in the Delta region, nothing serious, but enough to require a response. Caesar suggested to Ptolemy that he should lead the expedition himself, to show the people that their king was a man of action. Pothinus immediately objected, of course, but Caesar played on Ptolemy's vanity perfectly. He told my brother in a public audience, "You are not a child. You are 15 years old, the same age Alexander was when he commanded his first cavalry charge. Are you saying you are not as capable as Alexander?" My brother's face flushed with pride and anger. "I am as capable as Alexander, more capable. I am descended from his generals." "Then prove it," Caesar said simply. "Lead this expedition. Show Egypt that its king is a warrior, not a boy hiding behind advisors." Ptolemy agreed before Pothinus could prevent it. The eunuch's amber eyes promised murder, but there was nothing he could do without undermining Ptolemy's pride. And so my brother marched out of Alexandria at the head of 500 men, puffed up with his own importance, leaving Pothinus behind to seethe. With Ptolemy gone, I focused on the second pillar, the Alexandrian mob. I could not address them from the throne room, could not make grand public pronouncements, but I could do what I had done in the Agora, multiplied 100-fold. I sent out agents, trusted people, to spread a different story, not denial of my relationship with Caesar, which would only make people think I had something to hide, but reframing it. Yes, Cleopatra and Caesar are close, and why should they not be? She is securing Egypt's future, ensuring that when Rome finally absorbs the East, Egypt will be an ally, not a conquest. She is using her charm, her intelligence, everything in her power to protect Egypt. Is that not what a good ruler does? Use every weapon available? It was a dangerous gamble. I was admitting to the relationship while recasting it not as weakness, but as strategy. Not love, but calculated policy. And while it hurt to frame my feelings for Caesar in such cold terms, it worked. The whispers began to change. The story became not Cleopatra the traitor, but Cleopatra the clever. A queen who understood that in a world dominated by Rome, survival meant adaptation.
But while we were solving this secondary problem, while we were undermining Pothinus's support, the eunuch was not idle. He was preparing his final move, and when it came, it nearly destroyed everything. It was Arsinoe who brought me the warning. Arsinoe, my younger sister, was 20 years old, beautiful and ambitious. She had lived quietly in the palace for years, seemingly content to avoid the dangerous Game of Thrones. She had delicate features, large dark eyes, and hair that fell in glossy black waves down her back. She dressed in the latest Greek fashions, expensive chitons in jewel tones, gold jewelry at her wrists and throat. She cultivated an air of feminine fragility, but I had never trusted it. There was too much intelligence in those dark eyes, too much calculation. She came to my chambers late one night, when even Charmion had retired. I was surprised to see her. We had barely spoken in months. "Sister," she said, her voice soft and urgent, "may I come in?" I gestured her inside, wary. "What brings you here at this hour?" She twisted her hands together, the perfect picture of a frightened girl. "I have heard something terrible. I debated whether to tell you, but you are my sister. I cannot let you walk into danger unknowing." "What have you heard?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Pothinus is planning to poison Caesar," she said, the words tumbling out. "Tomorrow night at the feast celebrating Ptolemy's return from his campaign. There will be wine, specially prepared, and Caesar will drink it, and he will die, and everyone will blame you. They will say you did it to be free of Roman control. The army will march on the palace, and in the chaos you will be killed. Pothinus will place Ptolemy on the throne as sole ruler." My blood ran cold. It was exactly the kind of plan Pothinus would devise. Elegant, deadly, and impossible to prove until it was too late. "How do you know this?" I demanded. Arsinoe's eyes filled with tears. "One of Pothinus's servants is fond of me. He told me in confidence. He did not want me hurt when the violence begins. Please, sister, you must warn Caesar. You must stop this." I looked at her carefully, studying her face, her body language, everything, and I saw it, just for a moment, a flicker of something in her eyes. Satisfaction? Triumph? It was there and gone so quickly I could not be sure. But I knew, in that moment, that this was a trap. Not the poison, perhaps that was real enough, but Arsinoe's warning was designed to make me panic, to make me act rashly. If I went to Caesar in the middle of the night, if I convinced him to arrest Pothinus without proof, if I caused a scene at the feast, I would be playing into Pothinus's hands. I would look paranoid, desperate, exactly what he wanted. "Thank you, Arsinoe," I said carefully. "This is grave news, indeed. I will consider what to do." "Consider?" she said, and now I could hear the frustration in her voice. "Sister, there is no time to consider. You must act now." "I said I will handle it," I said firmly. "You have done your duty by telling me. Now return to your chambers and speak of this to no one." After she left, I sat in the darkness, my mind racing. The feast was tomorrow night. Ptolemy would return in the morning, flushed with success from his minor campaign, and Pothinus would have him back under control. If there truly was poison, Caesar would die. If there was no poison, but I acted as though there was, I would destroy my own credibility. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof of Pothinus's treachery, and I needed it before the feast. I sent for Apollodorus. When he arrived, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, I told him everything. "I need you to find that servant, the one Arsinoe mentioned. Find him and bring him to me, and I need you to do it quietly. Pothinus cannot know we are investigating." Apollodorus left immediately, and I spent the rest of the night pacing, unable to sleep, going over every possibility in my mind. As dawn broke over Alexandria, as the first light touched the harbor and the lighthouse flame was extinguished for the day, he returned. "I found him," he said grimly, "and you were right to be suspicious. He is not Pothinus's servant. He is Arsinoe's.
She paid him to seduce Pothinus's cupbearer and steal poison from the palace stores. She was planning to poison Caesar herself and frame Pothinus, eliminating both her rivals at once. I closed my eyes, feeling sick. My own blood. My own sister, plotting to murder Caesar and frame me for it, to seize the throne in the chaos that would follow. What do we do? I asked. If we accuse her publicly, without Pothinus's involvement, we still look paranoid, and Arsinoe will deny everything. Caesar's smile was cold and terrible. Then we do not accuse her publicly, he said. We use this. We let Pothinus think his plan is still secret. We let Arsinoe think she has gotten away with her scheme. And at the feast tonight, we spring our trap. That night, the throne room was filled to capacity. Ptolemy had returned that morning, victorious over a handful of bandits, and he was basking in the praise Pothinus had carefully orchestrated. He sat on his throne wearing the double crown, the crook and flail in his hands, looking more confident than I had ever seen him. Caesar and I sat side by side, the picture of cordial cooperation. Arsinoe was nearby, beautiful in a gown of sea-green silk, her eyes watching everything. Pothinus stood behind Ptolemy's throne, his amber eyes revealing nothing. The feast progressed through course after course, roasted meats and fresh fish, honeyed fruits and sweet pastries, wine from every corner of the Mediterranean. Musicians played, dancers performed. Caesar told stories of his campaigns in Gaul, had the whole room hanging on his words. He was in magnificent form, charming and witty, the center of attention.
When the final course was served, special cups were brought out, filled with wine from Caesar's private reserves. This was the moment, according to Arsinoe's warning, the moment when the poison would be administered. Caesar raised his cup. "A toast," he said, his voice carrying through the throne room, "to Egypt and to its future." Everyone raised their cups. I held my breath. This was it. But Caesar did not drink. Instead, he set his cup down and stood. "But before we drink," he said, his tone changing, becoming harder, "there is a matter that must be addressed. A matter of treason." The room went silent. Pothinus's face remained impassive, but I saw his hand tighten on the back of Ptolemy's throne. "I have learned," Caesar continued, "that there is a traitor in this room, someone who has plotted not just against Egypt's rulers, but against Rome itself, someone who sought to poison me and blame it on others, who sought to plunge Egypt into chaos for personal gain." "My Lord Caesar," Pothinus said smoothly, "surely you do not accuse." "I accuse Arsinoe," Caesar said flatly, turning to look at my sister, "Princess of Egypt, traitor." Arsinoe's face went white. "That is a lie," she cried, standing. "I warned you about Pothinus. I came to Cleopatra in good faith." "You came to sow confusion," I said, standing as well. "You stole poison from the palace stores. You paid a servant to seduce Pothinus's cupbearer. You planned to poison Caesar and blame it on Pothinus, eliminating both impediments to your own ambitions." "Prove it," Arsinoe spat, and now her beautiful face was twisted with rage, all pretense of fragility gone. "You have no proof." "We have the poison vials," Apollodorus said, stepping forward from where he had been waiting in the shadows. "We have testimony from servants, and we have this." He held up a small scroll. "Your own letter to the servant, outlining your plan. He kept it as insurance, in case you decided to dispose of him once the deed was done. Very wise of him, though it did not save his life in the end." Arsinoe looked around wildly, seeking support, but found none.
Even Pothinus was staying silent, calculating, realizing that defending her would implicate him as well. "I am a princess of Egypt," Arsinoe cried. "You cannot treat me like a common criminal." "You are a traitor," Caesar said coldly, "and you will be dealt with as such. You will be taken into custody and held until you can be transported to Rome to stand trial." "No!" Arsinoe lunged forward, but Caesar's soldiers were ready. They seized her, dragging her from the throne room as she screamed threats and curses. "This is not over, Cleopatra. You think you have won, but you have won nothing. Nothing." As her voice faded down the corridor, I looked at Pothinus. The eunuch's face was carefully neutral, but his amber eyes held murder. He had lost this round, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that he would not accept defeat. And I was right. 3 days later, Achilles marched on Alexandria with the Egyptian army, 20,000 men, armed and trained, approaching the city from the south. At the same time, Pothinus vanished from the palace, and we received word that he was with Achilles, that he had convinced the general to make his move. Caesar had 3,600 legionaries. The city of Alexandria had perhaps 500,000 people, many of them hostile to Rome, and we were about to be under siege. I stood with Caesar on the palace walls, watching the dust cloud on the horizon that marked the approaching army. I have solved one problem, only to create a disaster. If I had not exposed Arsinoe, if I had handled it differently— "This was always coming," Caesar interrupted. "Pothinus was always going to make his move. At least now we know where he is, and Arsinoe is safely in custody where she can cause no more trouble." "But we are trapped," I said. "You have too few men to face that army in the field. If they surround the city, if they cut off our supplies—" "Then we will have to be clever," Caesar said. "We will have to use strategy instead of strength, and we will have to trust each other absolutely. Can you do that, Cleopatra? Can you trust me with Egypt's fate?" I looked at this man I had come to love, this Roman general who had changed my world. "I can," I said. "The question is, can you trust me? Because what I am about to propose you will think is madness." "Tell me," he said. And I laid out a plan that was indeed madness, that violated every principle of warfare Caesar had ever learned. But as I spoke, as I explained my reasoning, I saw understanding dawn in his gray eyes, and more than that, I saw respect. "If this works," he said when I finished, "you will have saved not just Egypt, but possibly Rome as well. And if it fails, we die together, but at least we will have tried."